of strengthening the middle class, which is the backbone of our democracy. We can't go home without the payroll tax cut and unemployment benefits for all Americans who need them, who have lost their jobs through no fault of their own. With that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman from Texas is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, I'll yield 1 minute to the gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Johnson.
The gentleman from Ohio is recognized for 1 minute.
I thank the gentleman for yielding. Today I rise in strong support of H.R. 10, the REINS Act, because America's job creators are buried in red tape and need certainty from the federal government in order to create jobs. This bill would provide that. You know, when I travel up and down eastern and southeastern Ohio, I hear a recurring theme from the businesses that I meet with. Government overregulation is strangling their ability to hire new employees, expand their businesses, innovate, and compete. Today, it costs a business over $10,000 per employee just to comply with current federal regulations. This administration, that claims it believes in reducing the burden on small business, is in the process of adding another $67 billion worth of new regulations this year alone. This administration is burying small businesses, and enough is enough. The REINS Act will simply return control of the regulatory process to the American people, who are fed up with unelected bureaucrats stopping job creation and delaying true economic recovery. I strongly urge my colleagues to support this legislation, and with that I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Michigan is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, for our final speaker, Representative Lynn Woolsey of California, who is finishing out a brilliant career, I yield the remainder of our time.
The gentlelady from California is recognized for 4.5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to our great ranking member for allowing me this time. It's ironic. We're here today debating a bill supported by those in the Congress who won't cut taxes for the middle class, but won't budge when it comes to making permanent the tax cuts for the very wealthy. Why are we not here today talking about extending the payroll tax cuts, excuse me, why are we not here talking about extending employment benefits? Why are we not working on a jobs bill? That's what we should be doing. This Congress cannot, and I echo the words of our leader, this Congress cannot leave for the holidays without ensuring jobless Americans have the security of unemployment benefits that will make their Christmas, their holiday, the rest of their year livable. I know firsthand what it's like to fall on hard times and need a hand up. 40 years ago, when I was a single mother raising 3 young children, my children were 1, 3, and 5 years old, I was lucky enough to have a job, so I didn't need unemployment benefits, but I did need aid for families with dependent children, just to make ends meet. My family needed the compassion of the government and my fellow citizens just to survive. Without that safety net, I don't know what we would have done. We cannot abandon people who've been victimized by this sluggish economy. These are proud people who aren't just willing to work, they're desperate to work. I've heard, well, there are roughly 5 unemployed Americans for every available job. These folks need a life preserver. Extending unemployment benefits is not just a moral imperative. It will pump life back into the economy. It will give people money into their pockets that they can spend in their local communities and in the shops and grocery stores and other businesses that they will inhabit and support if they have some money in their pockets. And I can't believe that there are some on the other side of the aisle who have been resisting this extension. sticking their finger in the eye of jobless Americans while protecting lavish tax cuts for millionaires and for billionaires. That flies in the face of common sense and does violence to the very values of who we are as American people. One Republican member even said just recently that, and I quote him, he said, Congress ought to concentrate on paying people to work, not paying people not to work, except his party hasn't lifted a single finger to do a single thing about creating jobs in this country. You can't pay them to work when there is no work. So I ask you, having experienced what it means to have little kids that depend on you during hard times, I ask you, do not let these families down. Extend unemployment benefits. Pass a big, bold jobs bill. Put Americans back to work. And stop wasting time on the REIN bill. Thank you.
Gentleman from Texas is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, I'll yield 1 minute to the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Gerlach, who is also a member of the Ways and Means Committee.
The gentleman from Pennsylvania is recognized for 1 minute.
I thank the chairman, and I also want to thank Congressman Davis of Kentucky for his great leadership on this important legislation. While our small business owners are focused on meeting payroll and their employees are working hard making products and delivering for customers, unelected bureaucrats in Washington are putting in overtime coming up with new rules and regulations. In 2010 alone, the federal government issued 3,200 new regulations and rules. That's roughly 9 rules per day. Complying with all these regulations costs small business owners, as was mentioned, an estimated $10,500 per employee each year. At a time when we're trying to create jobs, we need to have a better accountability and transparency in Congress for the regulatory burdens the federal government places on businesses as we try to rejuvenate our economy. The REINS Act is a common-sense measure that would do just that, giving workers and small business owners and others a voice in the process of approving regulations that will ultimately affect their jobs, their families, and their communities. This legislation would make sure that job creators don't have to worry about unelected bureaucrats imposing regulations on them without the approval of their elected representatives. I urge my colleagues to support this legislation, and I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman from Texas is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, we are prepared to close, so I'll reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman from Michigan is yielded back already. The gentleman from Texas is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, I'll yield the balance of my time to the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Kingston.
The gentleman from Georgia is recognized for 2 minutes.
I thank the chairman. The REINS Act provides powerful common-sense regulatory reform. It reins in the costly overreach of federal agencies that stifles job creation and slows economic growth. If we want to have jobs, we have to help the job creators. This bill restores the authority to impose major regulations on those who are accountable to the voters, their elected representatives in Congress. Opponents of the bill resist it for 2 primary reasons. They say, number one, it takes too much time for Congress to approve or disapprove major regulations. Secondly, they say Congress isn't expert enough to understand whether major regulations should be approved or disapproved. Both objections account to one thing, their belief that Congress cannot be responsible and accountable for major decisions that affect America's economic life. Fortunately, the framers of the Constitution saw things differently, and so do most Americans. The Constitution gives Congress the federal authority to regulate the economy, not the unelected bureaucrats. If the Constitution gives the authority to Congress, then Congress should be willing to accept the responsibility and the accountability for these decisions. We should and we will take the time. We should and we will hold hearings. We should and we will allow amendments on the floor and votes, and most importantly, Mr. Speaker, transparency, something that the job creators are not being allowed right now. This administration has admitted its failure to consider the cost and the benefits when it imposes major new regulations. This administration clearly intends to force through the regulatory process things that they cannot achieve in the People's Congress. They do not want the transparency. They do not want the constituent input. And they do not want to have the hearings where experts from all over the country can give balanced testimony. The American people struggle enough under the Obama administration's failed economic policy. It's time for Congress to say enough. I urge my colleagues to vote for the REINS Act, and I yield back the balance of my time. Let's help the job creators and vote yes.
All time for general debate has expired. In lieu of the amendment in the nature of a substitute recommended by the Committee on the Judiciary printed in the bill. The amendment in the nature of a substitute recommended by the Committee on Rules printed in the bill, modified by the amendment printed in a Part A of House Report 112-311, shall be considered as adopted. Shall be considered as an original bill for purpose of further amendment under the 5-minute rule, and shall be considered read. No further amendment to the bill as amended is in order except those printed in Part B of the report. Each such amendment may be offered only in the order. No further amendment to the bill as amended is in order except those printed in Part B of the report. Each such amendment may be offered only in the order printed in the report by a member designated in the report, shall be considered read. Shall be debatable for the time specified in the report, equally divided and controlled by the proponent and an opponent, shall not be subject to the amendment, and shall not be subject to a demand for division of the question. It's now in order to consider amendment number 1, printed in Part B of House Report 112-311. For what purpose does the gentleman from Texas seek recognition?
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 1, printed in Part B of House Report number 112-311, offered by Mr. Sessions of Texas.
Pursuant to House Resolution 479, the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Sessions, and a member opposed, each will control 5 minutes. The chairman recognizes the gentleman from Texas.
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. Mr. Chairman, I yield myself such time as I may consume.
Gentleman's recognized.
Mr. Chairman, I want to first thank, if I can, the author of this piece of legislation, gentleman from Kentucky, Jeff Davis. Mr. Davis has distinguished himself among not only our colleagues, but also, I believe, his strong support of free enterprise and the people of Kentucky in doing his job, and I appreciate the opportunity to be here to help in that endeavor today. I believe that excessive government regulations are a significant barrier to the creation of private sector jobs in America today. This Congress has made job creation a priority. As a matter of fact, we had the minority leader down talking just a few minutes ago about job creation and the priority that it needs to represent. And as a result, we must review regulations which stand in the way of not only having more jobs, but also the overuse of rules and regulations that prohibit and add to jobs and job creation. That proposal that I believe we need to look at is whether the benefits outweigh any potential economic harm that might come. My amendment requires the agency submitted the report on a proposed federal rule to include an assessment of anticipated jobs gained or lost as a result of its implementation, and to specify whether those jobs would come from the public or the private sector. This assessment would be part of the cost-benefit analysis that would be required to be submitted to the Comptroller General and made available to each member of the House prior to our consideration of the rule. I believe that what we are doing here today is positive, not only benefit to the country in terms of recognizing that rules and regulations are burdening our economic engine, but also we are doing something about it here today, and I'm very, very proud to be here in support of this. Earlier this year, I introduced House Res 72, and the House passed it with strong bipartisan vote in February. My bill required authorizing committees in the House to review existing, pending, and proposed regulations through hearings this year and to report back to the House with their findings. The REINS Act today before us is an extension, I believe, of H.R. 72 and is important to measure to ensure that the government does not compete against the free enterprise system. And if they do, Congress should understand that at the time that we pass our laws. Mr. Chairman, I ask my colleagues to support this important addition. I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman reserved. The gentleman from Michigan is recognized.
I rise in opposition to this amendment.
The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
I want to merely start off by recognizing that somewhere buried in this amendment is the gentleman from Texas' recognition that regulations could or might create jobs. I want to thank him for that. But there's no credible evidence that regulations depress job creation. We've talked about this for 2 days now. But at our hearing in the Judiciary Committee, one of the anti-regulatory bills that we considered, we had an American Enterprise Institute witness, Christopher DeMuth, from the conservative think tank that AEI is, and he stated in his prepared testimony that focus on jobs can lead to confusion in regulatory debates, and that the employment effects of regulation, while important, are indeterminate. I must say to my colleagues that is exactly the same impression that I came out of my Judiciary Committee hearing with, and it's the same impression that I've come to realize is probably accurate in the debate for the last few days on the floor of the House itself. I'm concerned about this amendment because it would add to the analytical burdens of agencies the speculative assessment of jobs added or lost, and how many of those jobs would be added or lost in the public and private sectors. And for these reasons, I conclude that this amendment would not be helpful, and I am unable to support it, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Texas is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I'd like to yield gentleman from Texas. Gentleman, Mr. Smith, 1 minute.
Gentleman from Texas is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Chairman, I thank my Texas colleague for yielding me time, and I also thank him for offering this amendment. The bill restores to Congress the accountability for regulatory decisions that impose major burdens on our economy. As Congress makes those decisions, one of the most important facts to consider is whether new regulations produce jobs or destroy them. The amendment guarantees that when agencies submit new regulations to Congress, their cost-benefit analyses will be made available. The amendment also assures that agencies will specifically identify a regulation's impact on private and public sector jobs. With that information, Congress will be in a position to determine whether to approve the rules, and the American people will be in a position to hold Congress accountable for those decisions. I urge my colleagues to support the amendment and yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Texas is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I believe that the case which we're bringing forth today to Congress is that we believe that jobs should be priority number one for this United States Congress and for the American people, not just the middle class, but investors and people who want to have great jobs in this country, for us to be competitive with the world. And for us to do that, we need to recognize that people in Washington, D.C., who probably wouldn't recognize the free enterprise system if they saw it, put rules and regulations on people. They don't understand the business, they don't understand how they operate, and they sure as heck don't understand why it's important to have a free enterprise system, one which is nimble and prepared and ready for competition. I spent 16 years without missing a day of work in the private sector prior to coming to Congress. During those 16 years, I learned firsthand about how rules and regulations by the federal government and others can impede not only us and our ability to add jobs, but perhaps more importantly for us to be competitive. And I want to know today those people who will be in support of us making sure that we look at a rule and regulation and understand why we would not want to know what the impact on jobs would be. And that's what this vote will be. All members will have an opportunity to come down to say, we think that there should be a consideration or should not be a consideration at the time a rule, which will be written by an agency, what will be the impact of that rule. It would elude me to understanding why someone would not want to include that as part of a cost-benefit analysis. And thus, Mr. Chairman, I rest my case. I yield back my time.
The gentleman yields back. The question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Texas. Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to. Pursuant to Clause 6, it's now in order to consider Amendment Number 2, printed in Part B of House Report 112-311. For what purpose does the gentleman from Georgia seek recognition? The clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment Number 2, printed in Part B of House Report Number 112-311, offered by Mr. Johnson of Georgia.
Pursuant to House Resolution 479, the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Johnson, and a member opposed, each will control 5 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Georgia.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I rise to give myself as much time as I may consume. I rise to support my amendment to this dangerous bill, the REINS Act. My amendment is simple. It would exempt any rule that the Office of Management and Budget determines would promote job growth from the bill's congressional approval requirement, which is very cumbersome. The Republican majority claims that job growth is its top priority, and if that's the case, then my Republican friends should support this amendment. In reality, we all know this bill will not create a single job and is part of the majority's anti-regulatory agenda to make it virtually impossible to implement rules for our health and safety. This bill does not fine-tune the regulatory process, as the Republicans say. It will do nothing but make the regulatory process more bureaucratic and impose unnecessary hurdles for the agencies seeking to enact rules to protect our health and safety. The majority has a scare tactic. That is that regulations kill jobs, and that's nothing but a myth. The National Federation of Independent Businesses, which describes itself as the leading small business association representing small and independent businesses, does a regular survey of small businesses, and it found that the single most important problem facing small businesses is poor sales, not regulations. The REINS Act would delay, if not halt, regulations that are necessary for the health and safety of our constituents. Further, the bill would slow down regulations that may actually foster job growth. Thus, if my colleagues on the other side of the aisle are truly concerned about job growth, I would encourage them to support this amendment. I hope all of my colleagues will support this amendment, because the regulations that will help put unemployed Americans back to work should take effect without unnecessary delay. Thank you, and I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Texas is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, I yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Kentucky, Mr. Davis, the sponsor of the legislation.
The gentleman from Kentucky is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I could not disagree with the gentleman from Georgia more. It's obvious which one of us has actually run a business and which one is talking about a business. The reality of regulatory impact on businesses is huge. All you have to do is go and ask small business owners in any of our congressional districts if they can get credit because of the newly imposed FDIC rules on lending. They will tell you they can't. They can't get credit because of the new regulations. Banks are being consolidated and going under now. We're finding the rash of environmental regulations throughout the Ohio Valley. Machine tool operators, steel mill operators, and other manufacturers over and over say they will be out of business if the cap-and-trade carbon regulations are imposed by the EPA. These are facts. Healthcare right now is imposing hiring freezes with the Affordable Care Act. Once again, there is no reason under any circumstance that we should exempt major regulations that do indeed have real impact on hiring, investment, job creation, and especially individuals who want to take the risk to start a business. Congress should not abdicate its authority any longer regarding these rules. We should step up to the plate and be accountable, and if we do so, jobs will be created as a result. And with that, I yield back my time.
The gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Georgia is recognized.
Thank you. No, I've never operated a business on Wall Street, and I'm not really concerned about Wall Street. Wall Street has been getting all of the breaks, and this party, the Tea Party Republicans, seem hell-bent on shifting everything in their direction. I want to yield the balance of my time to the distinguished gentlewoman from Texas, Sheila Jackson Lee.
Thank you very much. May I ask how much time I have, please?
The gentlelady has 1.5 minutes.
I'm pleased to join my dear friend and colleague on the Judiciary Committee, the gentleman from Georgia, in offering this amendment as the Johnson-Jackson Lee Amendment. And I hold a sign that I think speaks to the gist of this amendment, Make It in America. A number of us have been on the floor of the House on a regular basis talking about creating jobs and making it in America. A good friend from Texas just passed an amendment without opposition, and I see no reason why the Johnson-Jackson Lee amendment cannot be accepted in the very same way. Bruce Bartlett, one of the senior policy analysts in the Reagan and George H.W. Bush administration, observed that regulatory uncertainty is a canard, an invented canard, that allows those who use it to use current economic problems to pursue an agenda supported by the business community year in and year out. And in other words, it is a simple case of opportunism, that regulations don't stop you from creating jobs. It in actuality provides clean air. It provides clean food. It provides the opportunity of a roadmap so that small and large businesses can do their work. The Clean Air Act is a shining example. A lot of regulations came out of the Clean Air Act. Given that the economy, since the Clean Air Act was passed in 1970 under Richard Milhouse Nixon, a Republican, it shows that the economy has grown 204% and private sector job creation has expanded 86%. I would ask my colleagues to join us in supporting the Johnson-Jackson Lee Amendment. Let's make it in America. Let's ensure there is a regulatory process that exempts any regulation that creates jobs. I ask my colleagues to support the amendment.
The gentleman from Texas is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, I'll yield the balance of my time to the gentleman from Kentucky, Mr. Davis.
The gentleman from Kentucky is recognized for 4 minutes.
I thank the gentleman. I would point out that Gallup has released a survey that shows that 1 in 3 small business owners are worried about going out of business, and overwhelmingly the respondents to this survey across the United States point to the uncertainty and the unpredictability caused by regulations. This bill, the REINS Act, is not anti-regulation. It is about more transparency and accountability in regulation, and Congress stepping up to the plate. It's important that we work together to restore that trust and confidence in the Congress, that we do our jobs, that we stand firm, and that we exercise restraint over the executive branch so that it cannot act in scoring itself on whether jobs are created. Let that be done by the Congress, who is held accountable. Let us stand for the vote and be accountable to our citizens.
Would the gentleman yield?
And with that, I yield back the balance of our time.
The gentleman yields back. The question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Georgia. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it. The amendment is not agreed to. Pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18, further proceedings on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Georgia will be postponed. It is now in order to consider Amendment Number 3, printed in Part B of House Report 112-311. For what purpose does the gentleman from Oregon seek recognition?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment Number 3, printed in Part B of House Report Number 112-311, offered by Mr. Schrader of Oregon.
Pursuant to House Resolution 479, the gentleman from Oregon, Mr. Schrader, and a member opposed, each will control 5 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Oregon.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. This amendment is pretty straightforward amendment. The goal here is to actually codify
some of what has been done heretofore just by executive order to make sure Congress's intent is actually done regardless of what the executive branch is considering. It basically codifies a cost-benefit analysis in statute that we would like to have. As we all know, a lot of times some of our agencies get a little overzealous, and some of the cost-benefit that they do or don't do does not actually reflect a lot of the real-world criteria by which American men and women and businesses actually operate through. So our goal here is to actually follow through on what's already existing law, but just codify it, so it's not a huge change. There is a little bit more to it. Right now, a lot of the independent federal agencies are not subject to this executive order, and of course this amendment would actually codify that they should be. There's no reason any federal agency should be exempt from giving Americans the idea what it's going to cost, what sort of benefit we're going to get out of this at the end of the day. And last but not least, I think one of the big pieces that is very, very important, as a veterinarian, a man of science, if you will, a little bit, I'd like to know the assumptions by which these cost-benefit analyses are done. That oftentimes influences the outcome. It's important for the agencies, the businesses, and again others in this country to look at what assumptions are being made when these cost-benefit analyses are done. Sometimes they deserve to be challenged. Sometimes some questions need to be raised. So I think it's extremely important that any cost-benefit analysis, the assumption should be made public and transparent. And with that, I yield back.
Back. For what purpose does the gentleman from Texas rise?
Mr. Chairman, I oppose the amendment.
The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, I'm prepared to close, or I'm prepared to yield to the gentleman from Kentucky to close, so we'll reserve the balance of our time.
The gentleman from Kentucky is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, I'll reserve the balance of our time.
The gentleman.
He yielded back.
The gentleman from Oregon has yielded back his time.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll yield the balance of my time to the gentleman from Kentucky, Mr. Davis.
The gentleman from Kentucky is recognized.
I thank the gentleman. I also oppose the amendment. The amendment leaves it to each agency to determine how it will conduct cost-benefit analysis of new regulations. This is regrettable. Each agency will be tempted to design rules that it can manipulate to claim that benefits routinely outweigh costs. In past administrations, when we've seen this attempt done, there was a divergence of standard, no continuity, and virtually no reduction in regulations or understanding of this across the whole of government. The Regulatory Accountability Act, which the House passed on December 2nd, 2011, calls for agencies to follow uniform guidelines for cost-benefit analysis. This improves quality and prevents deceptive actions by rogue agencies. The amendment undercuts that effort. Similarly, under Executive Order 12866, the President has long required agencies to follow uniform guidelines for cost-benefit analyses. The amendment undermines that requirement, too. I urge my colleagues to oppose the amendment and yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back. The question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Oregon. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it. The amendment is not agreed to.
Ask for recorded vote.
Recognized.
Ask for recorded vote, please.
Pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18, further proceedings on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Oregon will be postponed. It's now in order to consider Amendment Number 4, printed in Part B of House Report 112-311. For what purpose does the gentleman from West Virginia seek recognition?
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment Number 4, printed in Part B of House Report Number 112-311, offered by Mr. McKinley of West Virginia.
Pursuant to House Resolution 479, the gentleman from West Virginia, Mr. McKinley, and a member opposed, each will control 5 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from West Virginia.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I rise today to offer an amendment that would reduce the threshold for a major rule from $100 million or more to $50 million. This would ensure greater accountability. Let's keep this in perspective. I base this amendment on legislation that has already been adopted by the House in 1995 with bipartisan support to lower that, which lowered the threshold to $50 million. It passed with a vote of 277 to 141, with much of today's leadership who were here at the time supporting it. Also, in perspective, in fiscal year 2011, only 2.6% of all the rules that were classified as major, and in 2010, in FY 2000, only 3% met that criteria. Let's keep that in consideration. Would you be satisfied with only 2 or 3% of your food being inspected, or 2 or 3% of the aircraft and the rules which we fly? According to the Small Business Administration in 2008, it cost the economy $1.75 trillion in regulations. We just went through a gut-wrenching super committee that tried to reduce $1.5 trillion, but yet we let every year hundreds of billions of dollars pass through without involvement of Congress. Since January of this year, we have already seen in regulatory about 67,000 more pages of regulation, 88 million hours of man-hours that have been lost by businesses and employers trying to respond to the regulatory reform. None of this has had congressional oversight or approval. Canada realizes there needs to be more accountability, and they require all rules and regs of $50 million or more to come before their legislative body. Congress having jurisdiction of only 2 or 4% may be better than nothing, but I believe America deserves better. We need a system of checks and balances. No wonder the American people have lost their confidence in Congress and the federal government. I'm hopeful that the chairman will see the issues that I've raised here today and work with me on future legislation to correct that. With that, I yield back 30 seconds to Chairman Smith.
I thank the gentleman from West Virginia for yielding me time. I do share my colleague's desire to bring more congressional scrutiny to major regulations and appreciate his interest in the subject. I know that recent major regulations have hit West Virginia and the gentleman's constituents particularly hard. The Environmental Protection Agency's major regulations that affect energy sources and power production are among the most troubling. I look forward to continued discussions with the gentleman on these and other issues of interest to him. Now I yield back the balance of my time to the gentleman from West Virginia.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and appreciate your willingness to work with me on these issues. Since Congress deserves to have more specific numbers that have not been available from GAO and the CBO relative to lowering this threshold from 100 to 50, I ask unanimous consent to, for now, to withdraw my amendment. Mr. Chairman.
Without objection, the gentleman's
Thank you, and I yield back my
withdrawn.
time.
B of House Report 112-311. For what purpose does the gentlewoman from New York seek recognition?
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 5, printed in Part B of House Report number 112-311, offered by Mrs. McCarthy of New York.
Pursuant to House Resolution 479, the gentlewoman from New York, Ms. McCarthy, and member opposed, each will control 5 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentlewoman from New York.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I rise today to offer an amendment to the deeply flawed bill before us right now. Today we continue the majority's political motivated attacks on regulations. For the past 2 weeks, we have considered bills designed to slow down and stop the regulatory process. The bill before us today doesn't target just the rules that the majority might like you to believe are pragmatic. It would hamper all rulemaking, even those rules that are essential to public health and safety. My amendment today seeks to address that issue by exempting the REINS Act regulations related to food safety, workplace safety, air quality, consumer product safety, or water quality. These areas are too important to be impeded by the majority's need to generate political talking points. Consumers can't be put at risk because one house of Congress can't get its act together to pass food safety regulations. Children at risk from being exposed to toxic substance in toys can't wait 535 new regulators to weigh in. That's us, the members of Congress. People getting sick from tainted water supplies shouldn't be put at further risk by a legislative vote from one-third of the branch of the government. Today's bill, the REINS Act, would amend the Congressional Review Act to prohibit a majority rule from going into effect unless Congress enacts a joint resolution of approval, specifically approving of the rule. This is bizarre, backwards and unnecessary piece of legislation. The majority claims to be aiming to streamline the regulatory process and reduce the negative effects of a bureaucracy on the American people and on the American businesses. Ironically, however, this bill has the effect of growing the regulatory process by effectively adding 535 of us additional regulators to the process. Each member of Congress will now have to perform the role of a regulator. Congress will be forced to review the rules and regulations regarding highly technical matters currently handled by subject area experts. This technical complexity is precisely why we have professionals in the executive branch with subject matter expertise to work on these rules and regulations. This divide has been a fundamental cornerstone of the principle of separation of powers. The Congress is intended to represent the people and elect laws. The executive branch is intended to implement those laws. That implication takes the form of issuing rules, regulations, and specific guidance on how the law will be implemented. The REINS Act inappropriately puts Congress into duties that should be carried out only by the executive branch. Congress does have oversight responsibility and a duty to monitor these implementations, but we can currently have methods to address the problems when they do occur, and we do not need this bill. The bill also will lead to confusion, uncertainty, and more gridlock. Thanks to the REINS Act requirements that Congress have firmly approved of every major rule, one House of Congress will essentially have a legislative veto over any major regulations issued. The worst time for businesses is uncertainty, and the REINS Act increases it in the regulatory process. After engaging in the process of helping to shape the regulations through the rulemaking process, businesses will have to wonder what actions will Congress take? What legislative deal-making will occur? Will Congress approve of the regulation? Will Congress approve of the above regulation? This uncertainty keeps businesses from investing and from hiring new workers. More uncertainty under the REINS Act is the opposition of what we need. Congress should spend more of its time thoroughly considering and enacting legislation. We should have the implementation where it belongs in the executive branch. We should continue to monitor the implications and exercise proper oversight. And in the cases where correction is needed, use the current legislative tools that we have at our disposal to address those issues. I do urge all of our members to vote for my amendment to protect the American people. We don't need more gridlock here in Washington. That's why everybody back at home is mad at everybody. We need to go on with our work. We have to make sure that there's a streamlined process so we can get small businesses growing again, get people back to work. That's what the American people want from all of us. I urge my colleagues to vote for this amendment. With that, I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentlelady yields back. The gentleman from Kentucky, for what purpose does the gentleman from Kentucky rise?
I oppose the amendment.
The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The amendment carves out of the bill essential categories of major regulations. These include all major rules on food safety, workplace safety, consumer product safety, clean water, and clean air. In many cases, these are precisely the agency actions that impose the most cost, do not produce enough benefits, and do not faithfully implement the intent of the people's representatives in the Congress and in the Senate. A good example is the Environmental Protection Agency's recent proposal to control mercury emissions from coal and oil-fired power plants. EPA estimated that the rule would cost $11 billion annually to achieve, at most just $6 million in total mercury reduction benefits. That is an 1,833-to-1 cost-benefit ratio. Most of the benefits EPA identified to justify the rule had nothing to do with the control of hazardous air pollution. Proponents of the regulation have nothing to fear from the REINS Act. When agencies prepare good major regulations, Congress will be able to approve them. This provides agencies with a powerful incentive to get major regulations right the first time. Think about this from the perspective of the Mercury regulation that had the 1,833-to-1 cost-benefit ratio. Who do you think is going to pay for that? The mistake that is made in the arguments saying that it's the rich on Wall Street who benefit are entirely wrong. It's hard-working taxpayers. It's the middle class, the working poor, and the elderly whose utility rates will be driven through the roof as a result of a regulation that was imposed against the intent of the Congress. When an agency prepares a bad regulation, however, Congress will be able, under the REINS Act, to correct the agency and send it back to the drawing board. In the end, the agency will find a way to issue a good regulation that Congress will approve. It will improve the dialogue between the executive branch and the Congress. But until it does, those who must pay for regulations will not have to pay for the cost of a misguided major rule made by people who are not accountable to our voters. I urge my colleagues to oppose the amendment, and I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back.
Mr. Speaker, with that, I would ask for a recorded vote.
The question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from New York. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it. The amendment is not agreed to. The gentleman from New York is recognized.
I would ask for a recorded vote.
Pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18, further proceedings on the amendment offered by the gentleman from New York will be postponed. It is now in order to consider Amendment Number 6, printed in Part B of the House Report 112-311. For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Texas seek recognition? The clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment Number 6, printed in Part B of House Report Number 112-311, offered by Ms. Jackson Lee of Texas.
Pursuant to House Resolution 479, the gentlewoman from Texas, Ms. Jackson Lee, and a member opposed, each will control 5 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentlewoman from Texas.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. What America wants, and what I believe is important to the institution that we have such great respect for, is for members to work together. There are a number of amendments that were allowed by the Rules Committee, and I thank them. And the idea should be that these amendments improve a bill. It is obvious that I disagree with this bill because I think it will literally shut down government. If you cannot pass simple bills that have been passed out of the House of Representatives and now to the other body, and they have not yet passed, we've finished 1 year of the 112th Congress, how do you think we can manage what is called major rulemaking? 80 different rules would have to be approved by the President, the House, and the Senate. Literally, the American people would be held hostage. So this amendment is a cooperative amendment. I think it makes the bill better. The reason why I have our soldiers most likely on the front line of Afghanistan is because on account of a heinous act of terrorism on 9/11, our soldiers were dispatched to defend this nation in Afghanistan. In doing so, they had as their backup the Department of Homeland Security, a department whose responsibility is to secure the homeland. Simply ask the 9/11 families how serious it is to secure the homeland. My amendment would simply say that Homeland Security regulations or regulations dealing with securing the homeland, making America safe, would be exempt from this dilatory, long-winded process of approval. We need urgency when we speak of securing the homeland. For example, it is well known that we deal not only with terrorism potential from around the world, but it is also possible to have a catastrophic event that deals with a domestic terrorist attack. I cannot believe that my colleagues would not want to act in a bipartisan manner, and in particular with the REINS Act that requires a voted-on resolution of disapproval. Otherwise, this amendment does not go into place, resolution of approval, otherwise the security amendment does not go into place or regulation, I cannot believe that we would not in a bipartisan way accept the Jackson-Lee amendment. With that, I reserve my time.
The gentlelady reserves. For what purpose does the gentleman from Kentucky seek recognition?
I oppose the amendment, Mr. Chairman.
The gentleman is recognized.
I thank the gentleman. I would point out, first of all, that in a national emergency, the President of the United States does have the ability to enact an emergency rule. But what this amendment seeks to do is shield the Department of Homeland Security from Congress's authority to approve regulations under the REINS Act. That shield should be denied. For example, take the Department's rule to extend compliance deadlines for states to issue secure driver's licenses under the Real ID Act. 10 years after 9/11, hijackers used fraudulent licenses to board airplanes to murder 3,000 innocent Americans. DHS continues to extend the deadline. Another example is the Department's 2009 rule to recall the Bush administration's no-match rule. That regulation helped companies to identify illegal workers and comply with federal immigration law. When the Obama administration issued its rule to repeal no-match, it put the interests of illegal immigrants above those of millions of unemployed Americans and legal immigrants. This is the kind of decision-making that takes place at the Department of Homeland Security. Congress should use every tool it can reassert to reassert its authority over the legislative rulemaking functions it has delegated to DHS. The result will be to streamline communication, to improve communication, and have crisp and focused pieces of legislation and regulation. The REINS Act is available to do that. The point of the REINS Act is accountability, and each congressman must take a stand to be accountable for regulations that cost our citizenry $100 million or more annually. I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman reserves. The gentlelady from Texas is recognized.
Well, I thank the gentleman. I thank the chairman. Thank the gentleman for his explanation, but I think he plays right into the reason why he should join me and make this a bipartisan amendment. Frankly, I don't think we'd want to thwart or delay any process of rulemaking dealing with securing the homeland. I think when the gentleman was citing licenses, he was speaking of 9/11. It is now 11 years, and we have passed a number of rulemaking that has improved securing the homeland. As a member of the Homeland Security Committee, I'm quite aware of the progress that we've made, such as not having to address that kind of, if you will, mishap, more than a mishap, but that kind of lack of communication that we had in 9/11. The point I want to make is that our soldiers are on the front line in Afghanistan. They're asking, as someone would say on the playing field, have you got my back? The Department of Homeland Security is that department, created from the Select Committee on Homeland Security, which I was on, now on the Homeland Security Committee, to in fact provide for the security of the nation. With that in mind, it is, I think, untenable to think of thwarting that process. What we have here in the REINS Act is truly the REINS Act. It is a stranglehold on moving the nation forward on good regulations, clean air, clean water, but in this instance, securing the homeland. I believe that having the President, the Senate, and the House come together in a reasonable period of time to approve a rule dealing with securing the homeland while soldiers are on the front line defending us is an atrocious position to put the securing of the nation in. And let me just say this. Bruce Bartlett is a Republican. He said the regulatory uncertainty that Republicans talk about is a canard invented by Republicans that allows them to use current economic problems to pursue an agenda supported by the business community year in and year out. This is a Republican. The question is, let's separate the special interests. The REINS Act is here. They have the majority. More than likely it'll pass, but they're going to ignore our war and our fight to secure the homeland. Here's a front line. Here's a front line. What are we doing but putting a stranglehold on these amendments, a rulemaking rather, that will come forward that's attempting to help the American people? If we have to do something for the Transportation Security Administration and the security checkpoints and we need a rule, it's going to be held back because of this process. I reserve my time.
The gentlelady's time has expired.
I ask for the support of the Jackson-Lee amendment.
The gentleman from Kentucky is recognized.
I continue to reserve, Mr. Chairman.
The gentlelady from Texas, time's expired.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like to reiterate that the point of the REINS Act is accountability. It would not impinge. I believe it would actually improve our ability to manage rulemaking and regulation that relates to security. Indeed, the strongest authority in the House of Representatives who could speak on that very issue spoke in favor of this bill earlier, Congressman Chris Gibson from New York, who commanded a brigade in Afghanistan, where that picture was taken, and also a battalion in Iraq in 2005. And I would defer to his authority and military experience on that fact. The real issue is accountability and restoring transparency and checks and balances to the executive branch so that the American people do not have the reach of government into their back pockets, into their personal lives, into their schools, into their communities, and frankly, even in northern Kentucky, into our sewer pipes without the consent of the governed. And with that, I oppose this amendment and yield back the balance of our time.
The gentleman yields back. The question is on the amendment offered by the gentlelady from Texas. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it. The amendment is not agreed to.
Mr. Chairman, I ask for the yeas and nays.
Pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18, further proceedings on the amendment offered by the gentlelady from Texas will be postponed.
It is now in order to consider Amendment Number 7, printed in Part B of House Report 112-311. For what purpose does the gentlelady from Wisconsin seek recognition?
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk.
Clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment Number 7, printed in Part B of House Report Number 112-311, offered by Ms. Moore of Wisconsin.
Pursuant to House Resolution 479, the gentlelady from Wisconsin, Ms. Moore, and a member opposed, each will control 5 minutes. Chair recognizes gentlelady from Wisconsin.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. My amendment is very straightforward. It would exempt our nation's veterans from the burdensome layers and hurdles that H.R. 10 imposes and adds to the administrative rulemaking process, and would specifically remove veterans from the bill's so-called reigning provisions that require a joint resolution of Congress before an agency puts forth a major rule to help our men and women in uniform when they become veterans and after they return home from service. Many of my colleagues and I disagree with this bill for a variety of reasons, including the author's premise that reducing the administration's ability to regulate and promulgate rules will result in job creation. But whether or not we agree on the direction and approach to best help and promote America's future, we all agree on some things. We all agree that the last thing we want to do is to pass legislation that will delay assistance to those veterans who have selfishly chosen to fight for our country and deserve every ounce of assistance we can provide them when they come back home. Veterans deserve educational opportunity, rehabilitation for sometimes very severe disabilities, Mr. Chairman, mental health treatment for post-traumatic stress disorder, employment opportunities, housing opportunities. And delaying rulemaking authority will have dire consequences for our veterans. For example, Mr. Chair, one very disturbing issue for me has been the high rate of suicides among our service members. Really, we can't delay this kind of assistance. In fact, last year there were more deaths among our troops from suspected suicide than deaths from hostile combat. We're facing an epidemic here at home, too. A recent report from the Center for New American Security noted that 1% of the population has served in the military, and yet those service members represent 20% of all of the suicides in the United States. And resources for the military are sparse. According to a recent Veterans Health Administration survey of mental health providers, 40% responded that they could not schedule a new appointment at their clinic within 14 days. 70% of surveyed facilities cited an inadequate number of staff to treat veterans, and 70% said that they just simply lacked space. We also know that there's a serious unemployment barrier among our veterans as they return to civilian life. And the unemployment rate among vets who served in Iraq and Afghanistan since 9/11 is 12.1%, substantially higher than the national average that we're so concerned about now. Unemployment among vets will spike as we end the war in Iraq. The last 20,000 troops are expected to arrive by the end of the year from Iraq. And we can expect about an additional 10,000 veterans from Afghanistan to come home before the end of the year, and 23,000 by the end of 2012. We just can't delay assistance to our veterans. And this has been an area, Mr. Chairman, where Democrats and Republicans have typically come together and agreed. Yet, H.R. 10, the so-called REINS Act, will have unintended consequences and dangerous consequences for veterans who, of course, have received our undying gratitude and support. I really ask my colleagues to consider this amendment and support my amendment, because this is not an area where we want to delay services to them. We don't want to subject our vets to the politics of Washington and a gridlocked, hyper-partisan Congress that struggles even to extend unemployment insurance in a recession or a payroll tax to middle-class people, let alone a credit default by something so historically difficult had been as raising the debt ceiling. I just think that Americans will agree with me that our nation's veterans deserve to be excluded from the gridlock that this will invariably cause. Let's come together once more and adopt this amendment, Mr. Chair, not just for the troops that need help now, but for the troops that will be here in the near future. And I reserve the balance of my time.
Time is reserved. Purposes, the gentleman from Kentucky seek recognition.